Welcome back to the Graham Stephan Show, and we got to discuss a topic that seems like no one is talking about this. It's just something that's getting swept under the rug, and it's not getting enough attention until today. Because I want to bring this up, CNBC recently reported that hundreds of U.S. banks are at risk of failing. And with that said, I want to comment on this as soon as you hit the like button and subscribe, because I have a feeling it's a lot worse than people expect. So let's just begin here.
Hundreds of small and regional banks across the U.S. are feeling stressed. More than 280 banks face the dual threat of commercial real estate loans and potential losses tied to higher interest rates.
There will be bank failures, but this is not the big banks.
You see, Jerome Powell's been warning about this for really almost the last year. Ever since Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, it's brought to attention that a lot of the smaller banks issued excessive loans on properties that just aren't worth the same amount as they used to be. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Federal Reserve raised rates way higher than expected. That means a lot of the low interest rate loans that they issued and still hold on to are practically worthless unless they hold them to maturity. But if everyone needs the money at the exact same time, that's where issues are going to come up. And if that sounds confusing, we'll go over a lot more detail very shortly. Just keep watching.
A record $929 billion worth of loans are coming due, aka maturing, in 2024, driven by mass extensions of loans originally due in 2023. Regulators are working behind the scenes with potentially at-risk lenders.
See, it really makes me wonder how much is going on behind the scenes that nobody gets to see. It's purely just a phone call from the Federal Reserve to a specific bank, and they just say, hey, listen, I know how bad you're doing, but, listen, just don't cause any panic, but you need to raise some money. And we don't want to point you out specifically, but if you could raise $100 million, then we're going to be good, and no one has any problem. There you go. All right, bye. Click. Imagine how many phone calls like that are going on that we had no idea about. Because the big thing that they want to prevent is mass panic from people going and withdrawing their money from these small regional banks at the exact same time. The banks don't have the money to be able to pay back all of their customers, and that's where the problems come up. It's not like there's going to be an issue with like JP Morgan or Bank of America or Wells Fargo. Like the big banks have so much money, they have so much capital, they're not going to have any issues. It's the smaller banks that are seeing some of these cracks beginning to form. And the worst thing about this is to panic. That's the worst. That's their nightmare.
Both major and regional bank indexes are still struggling since 2023's bank failures.
I think most of them are just fine, but confidence is everything in banking. People start losing confidence, and even the healthy banks can be adversely impacted.
See, she said it perfectly. It's all about confidence. If people thought Silicon Valley Bank would be okay, and they didn't all try to withdraw their money at the exact same time, it would be okay. The issue here is that Silicon Valley Bank tied up a lot of their money in very low interest rate treasuries. And the issue with that is that, let's say they lock up their money for 3 years at a guaranteed return of 3%. Well, the issue is that if they need that money in the short term, they're going to have to take a loss on that because no investor wants to buy something at 3% when rates are currently paying 5 to 6%. So an investor needs to pay less for that, which means the bank has to take a loss. And if, they take a big enough loss, they're not going to have enough money for their customers who all want their money at the exact same time. Now, if the customers say, we don't need our money, we trust you, they're going to be just fine because they could write it out. Their loans come due, they get paid back, they earn a little less interest than they could have just waiting it out, but everyone's fine. That's the issue here.
Small banks control roughly the same value of assets as America's largest bank, JP Morgan Chase, with $3.2 trillion of assets.
It's funny, I was just thinking that JP Morgan is going to be the bank that comes and just buys all the other banks. JP Morgan is probably loving this. This is so good for the big banks because they could just say, hey, you have trouble? Here's a little money. Let me buy you. Oh, there, we got a great deal. Oh, what's this over there? Let's buy this bank too. And this bank, and this bank. And they're buying all these banks for a fraction of the cost of what they're worth because JP Morgan has the money to bail them out. So for them, they love it.
I think the issue is that a lot of these smaller banks support communities away from the coast. You're essentially hamstringing the economic development in those communities.
So here's what's happening. A lot of these banks are issuing commercial real estate loans on properties that are largely valued on how much money the property makes. So if a property is making $100,000 a year at a 10% return, that means the property is worth $1 million. The issue, though, is that if rents go down, like let's say they lent on an office building, And now that office only brings in $70,000 a year. Well, at the same return, at a 10% cap rate, now that building is only worth $700,000. If the original buyer only put 30% down, that now means they have no equity in the building. And if they put less than 30% down, they're upside down on the loan. They owe more to the bank than what the property is worth. And a lot of the banks are now worried that some of the existing owners of these properties would rather walk away from the deal than pay off their loan. Or simply, they just can't afford it. Or interest rates have gotten to a point where buying some of these buildings no longer makes sense. And if they don't have the income to support it, it falls back on the bank.
I think we have a very stressed banking system, but the vast majority of the banks aren't insolvent or even close to insolvent. They're just stressed. Doesn't mean that communities and customers don't get hurt by that stress.
I tend to think a lot of it is a loss of confidence in the banking system. And I think losing confidence in the banking system, like going and putting your money in a bank, you should have 100,000% trust that your money is safe. If you have any inclination that your money's not safe, that's a big problem. And that's one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve so far has done everything they could to protect customer deposits. The investors in the bank, we don't care about them. They're taking a risk. They accept the risk. They could lose capital. But the actual customers should not be losing any money. Because if they do, everyone else is going to wonder, is my bank safe?
If a bank insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also known as the FDIC, goes under, all depositors will be paid up to at least $250,000 per individual, per bank, per ownership category.
Yeah, and in terms of how good FDIC insurance is, apparently people get paid back sometimes within hours of a bank going down. Like FDIC insurance kicks in immediately. They do not want people to go without their money. But even if you're above the FDIC limit, you're probably still going to get the vast majority of your money back. You have to think, even in Silicon Valley Bank's situation, let's just assume they took a 20% loss. And I'm assuming the Federal Reserve doesn't bail them out. No other bank purchases them. And simply they have to take a loss and then pay their customers back. In those cases, I think the estimated loss was only going to be like a few percent of anything above $250,000. Like that's if they were allowed to fully fail and no one bails them out and customers are just, out of luck. It's only a few percent. So in those cases, it's pretty unlikely you're going to lose all money. It's probably just not going to happen. Oh, and by the way, this is really one of the reasons why it's so important to diversify and spread yourself out throughout multiple banks, multiple brokerages, and so on. Like, don't just rely on one place. Don't just rely on one stock to take you to the moon. Don't just rely on one stock brokerage. And if you want another alternative to that, by the way, and you want to get $20 for doing so, check out our sponsor, acorns.com/Graham, because for the month of May, they're giving you a $20 bonus when you sign up. And for those unfamiliar with how it works, Acorns basically takes all of your purchases, they round it up to the nearest dollar, and then they invest the difference on your behalf. So you could literally be investing money without even thinking about it. I've been using them now for about 6 years. I have now almost $100,000 invested with them with regular contributions. And if you want to be a part of it as well with a $20 bonus just for the month of May, they've extended it. The link is down below or go to acorns.com/Graham. Enjoy, and the $20, by the way, it takes you 5 minutes to sign up. So you may as well do it. You're watching the video anyway. Just get $20. Link is down below. And now let's continue.
We have identified the banks that have high commercial real estate concentrations, and we are in dialogue with them around, do you have your arms around this problem? Do you have enough capital? Are you being truthful with yourself and with your owners?
That's what I'm saying. I have a feeling a lot of these banks are getting phone calls. Hey, we're doing this survey that's going to come out pretty soon. If you raise $100 million, you're not going to be listed as a potential risk. That's all we need. All right, bye. Click. That's probably what's going on. It's probably not as big of a deal as some people think it is, but it's still something to consider.
The problem isn't a bunch of insolvent banks. The problem is a bunch of stressed and undercapitalized banks. What's the purpose of the capital markets if not to provide capital?
I completely agree with that. Basically, what they're suggesting is that in the event of my buddy loaning me some money, me investing it, I could just go to someone else and say, hey, I need this, $20,000. That's the loss I'm going to take on this. Just to help me pay my buddy back, and I'll get you all your money back. You just got to be patient for 2 years. Most investors are going to take that because it's pretty safe. It's not like the money is locked up in some gambling software somewhere. It's safe. They're going to get it back. It's guaranteed usually by the federal government. It takes some time. So if investors are able to bridge that gap, doesn't become an issue.
Regulators recently refused approval of Toronto-Dominion Bank's $13.4 billion deal to acquire First Horizon Bank.
We have a problem of concentration in the banking industry, but it's not at the regional bank level. I'm worried about concentration at the mega bank level.
See, here's the thing. I don't get the whole concern with concentration within the banking industry. It's kind of like saying, oh, there's only like 3 major banks and that's it. To me, I know it becomes like too big to fail at that point, but when they have the capital resources like that, hopefully they could pass some of those savings on to the customer. I know that will probably never happen, but concentration within the banking industry, I've never been concerned about that. Usually that just means a few of the big banks offer all the services, which is kind of the way it is already.
It took about 2 years from 2008, so you didn't really see the peak losses and delinquencies till about 2010. And we think the same thing will be true this time as well, which is this is probably going to play out over the next probably 2 years.
I have a feeling he's correct on this. Whatever happens in the markets is not going to be immediate. We're probably going to see a slow trickle of a few banks here and there having issues. Most of them, I feel like, are going to be totally fine. Most are going to see a capital infusion. Investors will come in. It's not going to be an issue. Yes, I'm sure 1 or 2 or maybe 3 over the next few years, probably going to have some severe issues. But is that going to be a widespread thing? Based on what I'm seeing, probably not. But I could also be very wrong. We'll see.
The biggest banks in the country, they're just too large and too interconnected, and the economy's too dependent on their continued functioning. So we can't afford really, really big bank failures. But, the economy's going to be just fine if a billion-dollar bank fails.
Yeah, the big banks are not going to fail. That's for sure. It's going to be the small regional banks that are going to probably have issues. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I do my best to read as many comments as I can. And don't forget, you could also get that $20 when you sign up for acorns.com/Graham in the description. They've extended the offer now for the month of May. So if you haven't done that yet, you haven't gotten your $20 for like 3 to 5 minutes worth of work, the link is down below. Enjoy. Thank you so much, and until next time.